Welcome to Pointy End. I'm Keith Sutherland. Today my guest is Jason Clare, member for Blaxland, I should say, sorry about that, and Shadow Minister for Communications, and welcome to Bendigo.
Thanks very much, Keith. It's great to be on the program and great to be here in sunny Bendigo.
It is sunny and we've put on the weather for you today, 30, a bit humid though. Now, we've had some high-profile Shadow and ministers coming on the program, i.e. Stephen Conroy, Shadow Minister Turnbull, and the Assistant Minister Michelle Rowland, plus yourself now, Shadow, on the program talking about communications, NBN. We'll talk about NBN, and then we'll get into the guff of what's been happening, and there's been plenty going on in politics, even though it's supposed to be a dull time of the year. Firstly, we'll start off with the previous Labor government's NBN,
Yep.
which was going to provide 93% of Australians to premises, fibre to the premises, of course, directly, and that was going to be served by a combination of satellite, wireless broadband. But all that period of time, there's been a lot of changes, a lot of things, and now we've got the new technology, and we'll come to that. But have we really gained, because Bendigo in all of this is probably the poor relation, and this was what Michelle Rowland mentioned. Ballarat got NBN fibre to the premises, Shepparton got it. Bendigo is not going to be able to compete with fibre to the node, but just give us a bit of an overview of where you've seen that transition from when ALP had it, some 2013, to where we are today.
Well, it's chalk and cheese. Under Labor, 93% of Australia would have got fibre all the way to their house. Under Malcolm Turnbull's plan, only 20% of Australia will get fibre to the house, including places like Ballarat, but Bendigo is going to miss out. Instead, places like Bendigo will get fibre to the node, which means fibre goes to about half a kilometre away from your house, and then there's a box in the street that connects the old copper network that connects to your house at the moment to that fibre network. Now, the differences in speed and reliability are enormous. So we're effectively creating two types of Australians, those that have the real NBN, fibre all the way to the house, and those that will miss out. Inevitably, government's going to have to come back down the track and finish the job. What we've seen overseas is that where people have built this fibre to the node network, it's not good enough, and ultimately government's got to come back and fix that up. So it's disappointing that Malcolm Turnbull thought that just by trying to do it faster and cheaper, he could give people what they wanted. It's blown out in cost, it's blown out in time. He said he could do it for $29 billion. It's blown out to 56. And it's now 2016, and he said that everyone would have it this year. That's not going to happen now. It's blown out to 2020. And what we're left with at the end, as you say, is this second-rate version of the NBN, which uses copper, and it's not going to be good enough for the people of Bendigo or the rest of Australia. Going
back to that, Paul Budd, who is telecommunications analyst, expert, been in Bendigo talking about this, and he talks about the multi-technology mix as a dog's breakfast, and I dare say you agree with that. And we're going to have 60,000 node boxes. It's all great if you're close to the box, but if you're down the road from the box, the effectiveness is nowhere near as good. We don't know. Remediation has to be done to the Telstra, not the Telstra copper itself, but the boxes and things that they're encased in. So we've got enormous problems, and I'll just read you out a media release from the 14th of December 2015. You said the following. About a year ago today, Malcolm Turnbull brought back the old copper network John Howard sold last century. Very appropriate. On the same day, he also brought an old HFC network that Optus planned to decommission about a year ago. Just on that point, on the 14th of September 2010, Tony Abbott orders Malcolm Turnbull to demolish the NBN. Is that really the way it sort of transpired? You mentioned before that Malcolm said that he's going to have quicker, faster, cheaper, etc. And all of a sudden, when Tony goes back to 2010, said destroy it because it was probably one of major platforms that Labor had. That was the difference between Labor and Liberal at the time. But of course, what we've seen as a mishmash of now the technologies, getting a Rolls Royce, as you said, now 20% only with fibre to the node.
Yeah, well, Tony Abbott never really understood this. He thought the NBN was just playing video games, and so he told Malcolm Turnbull, just get rid of the whole thing. Malcolm Turnbull came back and said, look, we can still build the NBN, but we'll build a slower second-rate version of it using Telstra's copper network. So one of the first things they did was negotiate with Telstra to get that old copper network back. And that's what fibre to the node, what they want to build here in Bendigo, relies upon, the Telstra copper network. The problem for Malcolm Turnbull is he thought that they could fix and maintain that copper network for about $50 million, but leaked documents that came out at the end of last year shows that the cost of fixing that old copper network is not $50 million, it's blown out to over $600 million. So it's blown out by 1,000%. The HFC network, which will be used to deliver the NBN in places like Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane and other capital cities, also has challenges. There's two types of HFC. One's Telstra's and the other one's Optus's. With the Optus HFC network, Malcolm Turnbull said, look, this will be easy to use, but another leaked document that came out last year said that it's unusable and that they're going to have to find another method to deliver the NBN in those areas or spend something like $350 million. So this is a mess. It was supposed to be simple, easy to do, cheaper to build, but Malcolm Turnbull's great idea for the NBN has turned into Malcolm Turnbull's mess. Double the cost, double the time to build, and the cost of fixing the copper is blown out by 1,000%. As I said last year, if you were in the private sector and you were given a job to build something and you went back to the boss and you said, sorry, the cost of this is blown out by 1,000%, you wouldn't be promoted into the top job. You'd probably get the sack. But that's what's happened here. Malcolm Turnbull's been promoted to Prime Minister in spite of the mess that he's left here with the NBN.
Having said that, and as you said, 29.5 billion to 56 billion projected, and then we've got speeds of 25 megabits to 50 for 2019, nothing like the 100 megabits that you're going to produce. Why isn't it that you're not sort of making inroads on this? The mainstream media, and we'll come to some of the things that have been going on with the ABC, but why isn't it that you haven't been able to get traction here? Because to me, this is the greatest piece of infrastructure this country will ever see. Tony Abbott prided himself on being the infrastructure Prime Minister. We never saw anything. Malcolm Turnbull is now saying he wants to be the Prime Minister that has seen some infrastructure. And as you say, this is the best piece we've ever seen. I say, best piece of infrastructure we've ever seen, but nothing's happening. Why aren't you breaking through, and why aren't you getting the traction from the media to highlight some of the problems that fibre to the node is causing?
I think Malcolm Turnbull's chickens are slowly coming home to roost. When Tony Abbott was Prime Minister, fair enough, people were focused on things like the promises he broke on education, on health, on
ABC, SBS.
Yeah, the promises he broke on cuts to the ABC and SBS, as well as, one day you'd wake up and he's knighted Prince Philip. The next day you'd wake up and he wants to charge people to go to the doctor. So there were a lot of reasons to be upset with Tony Abbott. We've got a new Prime Minister who's made grand promises, but it's worth looking into his background. And for the last 2.5 years, he had one job, and that was to build the NBN. He promised that he could do it for 29 billion, blew out to 56, promised he could deliver it by this year. It's blown out, double the time to 2020. And so I think the fact that Malcolm Turnbull's now the Prime Minister means that people are going to pay a lot more attention to the mess that he's made of the NBN.
Okay, Mr Turnbull also was adamant that we are unlikely in Australia that we'll need 1 gigabit of download speed, but with education, health, surely that is the future. And he's saying we don't need that. And I know that many interviews I've seen, he suggests that we'll never need that sort of speed.
Well, that's just short-sighted. It's already happening around the world. I was in Singapore a couple of months ago, and all of the internet providers in Singapore offer a gigabit speed, and a lot of people are taking that option up. If you go to the United States, where Google is rolling out fibre in Kansas as well as Austin, a number of other places in the United States, it's the one option. You buy a gigabit service. I spoke to some senior executives at Verizon, one of the big IT companies, ISPs in the United States recently, and they told me, they said, a gig is the new 100 megabits per second. So not everybody is going to need it straight away, but you can imagine a world where a lot of Australians, a lot of people are going to want gigabit services. And to say, look, we're not going to need this, that as they said, I think a year or so ago, that the average home will only need 15 megabits per second, I think is myopic. It's short-sighted. We need to plan for the future, and we need to think about the NBN a bit like this, Keith. 100 years ago, when the electricity network was being connected to every home in Australia, what was it for? It was to light the house. But what do we use electricity for today? We use it for a multitude of different things in the home, everything from the TV to the air conditioner to charging the mobile phone, the stove, everything. The NBN will be like that. To try to imagine today everything we're going to use this fibre optic cable that's connected to our house is impossible, because smarter people than you and I will come up with new devices, new purposes to use it for, and we will use those in our homes in the future, or our kids or our grandkids will, and they'll need more than 15 megabits per second or 25 megabits per second. They'll use it for gigabit services. And for Malcolm Turnbull to say we don't need that makes me wonder about his judgment, makes me wonder about whether he really has the vision that Australia needs.
Well, Tony Abbott thought he invented the internet, so we'll go on from that. We'll come back to the local scene, and I don't expect you to know about it, but knowing our hard-working member, Lisa Chesters, there's a lot of things that go on, and I dare say she has briefed you because you've got an interview this morning. But Epiloc, Gorlong, Huntley, Tooleen, NBN, fixed wireless. The tower was built in 2013, but the tower is not yet operational due to it being rejected on planning grounds of VCAT.
Yes.
What is Labor's position with some of these things? Because it's like everything. In our program here, council put it up, it's going to be an NBN tower. No, we don't want it in our area, we don't want it in our backyard, and that's the problem. But how is Labor going to fix that problem?
Well, this is just another smaller example of the mess that we've got with Malcolm Turnbull's version of the NBN. You've got a number of towers built, but the key tower that needs to be built in order to switch on the service for the local community is not built yet. It can't be beyond the wit of man or woman to be able to find a location for the tower, build it and switch the network on. And NBN should be on the front foot on this, working with the local community, working with the Victorian government to find the right solution. So if this is still not worked out by the time of the next election, I become the Minister for Communications, the first thing I'll do, working with Lisa and working with the local communities, get the NBN down here and sort this out.
There's a few questions that come out of that with the satellite services, and these are some of the questions, if you don't mind. There's about 3 or 4 of them, if we can just run through them. NBN are saying that we'll start and connect to Sky Muster mid-year. But the questions that are really asked is the quality, usability of the service, capacity of large data allowance for video streaming, such as Netflix, because I've just bought a new TV the other day, and on that programmer is Netflix. I wasn't expecting it at all. Fortunately, my wife loves it, but there you go. So that's part of the future. But are we really going to be able to use that with the satellite services? Yeah, well,
the new satellite, the NBN satellite, will provide a much better service than the existing satellite services. It's a KA satellite, the latest generation in broadband satellites. We're very lucky that the first of those satellites is in orbit now, because the original plan that Malcolm Turnbull had was to cancel the contracts, to not have those satellites. We signed off on those contracts before the last election, so he couldn't cancel them. Now he says they're a game changer, so he's had a bit of a conversion. I'm glad that he now realises how important this is for people who live in regional Australia or in remote parts of Australia. My only real concern here is whether they're asking too much of the satellites and they're putting too many Australian communities on the Sky Muster satellite. The information coming to me is that there are some parts of Australia which were originally intended to get optic fibre that they're putting on the satellite now. That might mean that the service that the satellite provides is not as good as it should be. So we're watching that very carefully. But be in no doubt that this satellite is much, much better than the existing services that people can get today.
Yeah, because it seems like what you're saying is that there probably could be overload, and then we're going to be able to have gaming devices for PlayStation, Xbox, not that I play one. And if elected at the next election, what sort of services will they be, and will they be equitable? Because you said before some are going to go to premises. Now too much use is going to be used of that satellite.
Yeah.
But is it going to be equitable for areas like Bendigo that, I know we're getting the fibre to the node, but is it going to be equitable out there in the bush? And that's a real concern.
Use those sorts of services. But for things like gaming, the higher the speed of the broadband service, the better for gamers. They like to make sure, for example, that when you press a button, you can automatically see it on the screen. That's called latency, making sure there's no gap. And so a lot of gamers around the world will play with speeds of 200 megabits per second or even higher. And with the satellite, it's about 25 megabits per second. So yes, you'll be able to use all of those services, things that people are pretty frustrated about in Bendigo, that they can't use they can't use the internet for anything other than emails at the moment, if that, just because can't get ADSL or can't get ADSL2. So when the satellite is up and running and available, it's going to provide access to services at the moment that people in other parts of Australia take for granted. But the higher the speed, the more reliable the service, the better for the people of Bendigo.